Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find more out about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Today's guest is Scott Schirmer, a writer-director known for more than a few really good indie films, some suspense thrillers in there, possibly borderline slasher, a few of which are Found, more recently The Bad Man, and welcome, Scott.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Anything you want to plug at the start of the interview?
I don't have anything to plug right now. I did The Bad Man in 2018, and 2019 I took off, and 2020 is looking like another great year to take off from any kind of extracurricular activity.
Yeah, we're almost halfway through this year anyway, so it might just be a good time for garbage year. Just gonna kick back and relax.
Would you like to plug anybody else's stuff? Friends?
Oh my gosh. They'll get offended. If I start, then I couldn't stop.
Right, like who didn't make the list?
Right.
My friend Brian's got a movie called Jesse's, I can never get the full title right, and I hope he'll forgive me, Jesse's Super Normal Regular Average Day, something like that. It's available at my website, scottschirmer.com. If you go to scottschirmer.com, you can pick up copies of almost anything I've been involved with except Harvest Lake because it's out of print. But mine and Brian's movies are both available there, and hopefully I'll be able to add some other filmmakers' stuff there in time.
Oh, yeah. And if I can say one phrase to encourage anyone to check out Jesse's, the rest of the title, which I can't remember, it's topless chainsaw-wielding nuns. There you go. That's incentive enough.
3 of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Not bad.
That's Brian. We don't have similar tastes, but we do have a similar work ethic, and we got along really well behind the cameras. It's funny to me because we couldn't be more different as storytellers, I think.
All right. Before we get started, a little information for you and the listeners. These are your trigger warnings. We're going to be talking about horror movies, which could involve anything from murder, rape, suicide, child abuse. There will be F-bombs. So if you're not prepared for that, please go take care of yourself and come back. Otherwise, enjoy me saying fuck, fuckity, fuck, and other such things.
I'm going to say pussy.
That's a good one.
It's actually my favorite word. It's not even what it is, what it represents. It's unfortunate that it's a bad word, but I actually think it's the most beautiful word phonetically that a human being can say. Pussy. It's just so like the buildup of pressure behind your lips, and then the sultry, I don't know, it's sexy how you release that pee. Your vital life essence is coming out, and you love it. You love that you're giving this life essence into the world, so you go, see, pussy. It's like, yes, I'm dying a little, but I love it. Pussy.
Yeah. See, it's like half death rattle, half celebration.
Yeah. My second favorite word is cheese.
Hopefully not together.
Yeah, they don't go together well.
Yes, no famota cheese, please.
Sorry. That was bad.
You had to, I know.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to. All right, so Scott, in this interview, we'll be asking 3 sets of questions covering your childhood, teenage years, and adulthood to basically find out what it is about horror that you like, maybe some things about horror that you disliked, things that scared you as a child or as an adult, and so on and so on. The idea being that if we interview enough people, we might find some interesting common threads or possibly have some learning experiences, which we have along the way. We'll be coming at the questions from multiple angles, sometimes triggering other memories. It's like sometimes you discuss one thing in one of the phases and you forgot about it and you didn't even really think about that. All that being said, not meant to be a therapy session. So, on conversation, if at any time you just don't want to talk about something, you can just say pass.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, what am I in for? What's just going on? It's fun. So starting off with childhood, what are some memories that you have of childhood horror-wise? Like anything that scared you or influenced you as a child regarding horror?
I think about Bigfoot a lot because I grew up in the late 70s and through the 80s, and in the late 70s, Bigfoot was just a huge pop culture thing, but it wasn't really pop culture at least from my childhood perspective, Bigfoot was real because I had family members telling me stories about Bigfoot sightings, aunts and uncles that would be coon hunting in the woods with the dogs, and they'd hear weird, unearthly noise, and the dogs would run away. And I had one great aunt that swore Sasquatch was in the yard staring at her one day. And so these became very real stories. And at that point, too, on the news, like the local news would report about Sasquatch sightings. So it just seemed real. And my grandparents took me to a movie called Sasquatch, The Legend of Bigfoot.
It's a good title.
And that was the first horror movie I think I ever saw, even though it's very tame. But it was very scary for, I guess I would have been 5 maybe or 6. So that movie's always kind of stuck with me. So Bigfoot was my boogeyman growing up, and we always lived in rural farming areas in Indiana. So there was a lot of woods and everything. So the woods were always scary to me as well. And tornadoes, actually, also. And I think to this day, I still have, when I do have a nightmare, which I don't have very often, it tends to be about apocalyptic events way far beyond human control, like aliens coming, like huge alien hands literally coming out of the clouds and clawing the earth, and everyone's trying to escape that kind of a thing. I don't have nightmares about Bigfoot anymore, but I am still interested in making a Bigfoot movie, except for the fact that everyone and their dog has made one at this point.
There are so many.
I mean, they're so bad by and large, too. It's kind of disappointing.
I don't know, what was it, Primal Rage? I think that was pretty interesting. It was a good take on it, how there were, like, spoilers, there was a tribe of Bigfoot at the end.
I haven't seen that one. I actually liked Exists from the Blair Witch director. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think it needed to be a found footage movie, but it at least portrayed Sasquatch in a scary manner, which I haven't seen all too often.
Was that the one that, didn't Bobcat Goldthwait direct a Bigfoot movie too?
He did, but it was more of like a faux documentary, and the Bigfoot, spoiler alert, didn't actually turn out to be a Bigfoot. I think it just turned out to be a feral woman. It was kind of strange. I wasn't a huge fan of that one.
Yeah, I could see that happening. You know, if the hair grows really long, then it kind of looks rather Sasquatchish.
Yeah, she had long hair. You saw her fleetingly at the end.
So, in childhood, other than Bigfoot, any
media-wise, like movies or stories or novels?
Media-wise,
I think my parents conceived me after going to the drive-in and seeing a horror movie. They thought it might have been The Hills Have Eyes, but the dates of release don't really match up with when I was born. Mom almost miscarried me in Florida, as a matter of fact, when she saw The Exorcist down there. And then as I was growing up, they didn't really refrain from taking me or my little brother to horror movies. We saw Scanners.
Nice.
I remember at least seeing the trailer for The Shining. I don't know if I saw the whole movie. And even when I was 12, they would take us to see movies like Platoon or Trading Places, Boobs, things like that. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't think it hurt me or my brother at all to be exposed to that sort of thing at all. So I don't think it's a bad thing if you know your kids well enough that they can handle that kind of stuff. But my point in saying all that is that horror films didn't really affect me. The ones that got to the borderline of affecting me were after we became Jehovah's Witnesses, which was not a fun experience, but my mom's family was in it and they kind of pulled her into it. And then my brother and I had to go. My dad never did participate. He was like, oh, this is all bullshit. But while we were the Jehovah's Witnesses, it was very frowned upon to have horror movies or even sci-fi or fantasy in the household. And my dad rented The Faces of Death.
Wow.
And I think Evil Dead 2. And Mom made us put those videotapes out on the porch in the winter because she wouldn't let them stay in the house overnight. But The Faces of Death kind of, I was, that was 84, 85, so I was 10 or 11.
Okay, yeah.
And, the religious stuff turned out to be scarier because even as like a 10 or 11-year-old, I saw this cult behavior all these people would get together and go door to door on the weekends and selling magazines to vulnerable old people. And I could see that the cult got together, I think 4 times a year. And we got out of school to go to these big conventions where they would give some sermons and stuff. But at the end of each of those days, we all had to line up and buy books. And even as like an 11-year-old, I could like, this is just a book selling gig. These people are only here to sell books. Like that's the only reason we're here. I was aware of capitalism at that point. I just thought it was all such bogus bullshit. And by the time my mom decided, okay, we need to get out of this, it was a little bit scary because the Jehovah's Witnesses believe if you leave the congregation, you're tainted. Demonized is the word they would use a lot. And they would do everything to try and keep you from leaving the organization, because if you did leave, no one within the organization could ever have any contact with you again. And she had a sister and a father that were in the organization. And so technically she's not really allowed to speak to those people anymore. Although I think over the years she has reestablished contact with some of them.
Wow.
And I remember being there one night where one woman was crying hysterically. And I asked, why is she in hysterics? And I found out it was because her son had just been excommunicated. And so she was now expected to never communicate with her son again. So it's kind of scary. The one thing I do respect about the Jehovah's Witnesses, though, is that they don't baptize at birth. They wait until you're old enough to make that decision, to make that commitment, and to have all control of your faculties when you make it, so that you know what you're getting into. So my mom was baptized, but me and my brother never were. So we wouldn't be treated the same way that she would be if she decided to leave the organization. But when she did decide to go, there were a couple of Sundays where me, my mom, and my brother would hide in a closet in the middle of our house because Jehovah's Witnesses were around the house knocking on the doors and windows trying to save our souls. So that's some scary shit.
Yeah, that's got a little bit of that cult aspect to it, and it's in its own right. It's just by default kind of creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, before we go further, I just wanted to ask. I don't know, is it your bird in the background, or are you playing with a lighter?
Oh, it probably is the bird. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just wondering, because if it was you playing with a lighter, I'd say,
stop that. Yeah, I think Cushing's usually quiet, but now that you mention, I have my headphones on, so I can't hear him as well. So I'm going to try and put him on my shoulder. There he was again. He clucks. He makes weird little clucks and quacks. Be quiet, Tweety. He's my quarantine buddy, named after Peter Cushing.
I recognize the
name.
Coming
back to horror. He's a Hammer horror icon. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing made a bunch of movies together.
Yep. He was also Moff Gideon, I think.
Tarkin.
Grand Moff Tarkin. There you go.
Yeah,
Moff Gideon's from the show. That's fresh in my mind.
Okay, that I recognize definitely.
Grand Moff Tarkin, that guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, back on track. I think one of the questions was, did you have any scary dreams as a kid? But I think you kind of covered that one with the Bigfoot dreams, right?
Well, the apocalyptic type dreams and tornadoes. Yeah. Tornadoes were scary because we would be like in the eye of them at some points, or not the eye, but we would just be in that creepy calm and the sky is yellow and there's no wind movement. And that's like the perfect time. And I just remember the fear in my mom's voice, like everyone get in the basement and stay in the basement. There were Tornado Alley is pretty much where I grew up. They call this track of where a bunch of tornadoes went through in 74, the year I was born, Tornado Alley. And I heard so many stories about that. I was only a month old, I think, when all the tornadoes hit in 74. And I was at my grandparents' house next to the Ohio River. My parents were up in Madison on top of the hill. And the tornadoes knocked all the trees down. So when my parents tried to get back, they couldn't in a car. So they had to walk a couple of miles over fallen trees to get to my grandparents' house, not knowing if the farm would still be there, if I would still be there, if the tornado had hit us or not. But we had a cellar there. We had a cellar. So my great-grandparents, my great-aunt, and me, and we were all in the cellar and we were safe. And I remember my great-aunt telling stories about looking up out of the cellar and seeing the bottom of the Ohio River because the water had parted. The tornado had pushed all the water to the sides.
Wow.
And eventually we got back together. So I was sort of like the tornado and me being born in the same month were kind of a thing that married us together, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I have dreams about tornadoes a lot too.
Interesting. Yeah.
So to go back to the horror movies and stuff, you said that because of the way you were exposed to these, they didn't really scare you. I'm guessing your parents must have imparted some wisdom to you about them, not being real or something like that, or.
Yeah, we didn't watch horror movies. I mean, I told you my dad rented those movies, but that was really out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't, when they were dating, when my mom and dad were teenagers, I know they saw a lot of horror movies, but it seemed like for whatever reason growing up, it was not our bag. I got exposed to almost every other kind of movie through going to movies with my dad, my mom, or my grandmother. All the bases were covered, but no one really cared that much for horror. And while I was growing up in the 80s, the only horror that was really in pop culture were slasher movies, it seemed. There were occasionally some supernatural things, but they were really kind of family oriented, like Poltergeist or Gremlins, movies that I love and never even considered horror when I was growing up. But horror to me was Freddy, Jason, and the slasher stuff, the Nightmare on Elm Street.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought those were silly.
Which, you're not wrong. They were.
Yeah, they are. But I didn't give them the time of day as a child. I didn't like horror. It wasn't until college when I was talking to some roommates about horror, and I was telling them that I didn't like it. I thought it was a silly genre. And they said, well, you just haven't seen the right horror movies. And Brian and Jeff and I went to the video store, and we rented the original Texas Chainsaw. I hate that I even have to say the original in front of anything. So I'm not going to tonight. So we rented Texas Chainsaw and Evil Dead 2. Mm-hmm. And I watched both of those, Evil Dead 2 for a second time. And I loved Texas Chainsaw. It had a profound impact on me. It's one of my two most favorite movies of all time now. It's this thing I'll always be chasing and never be able to achieve as well as they did back when they shot it. But then I saw, okay, yeah, horror can be good. And then I decided, well, you know what? The stories that I wanted to tell at that age in college were too ambitious to ever bring into reality because I was into big sci-fi, fantasy stuff. But horror was something I could imagine doing just like Tobe Hooper or Sam Raimi did on shoestring budgets. And so that's what I decided to do because it wasn't for my particular affinity in horror, but it was just because I also liked horror. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of horror fans that only watch horror. And I'm like, well, I'm not like that. I kind of watch all kinds of things now. Even Westerns and musicals were the last things I could get into, but I got into them. And but horror is the genre that makes the most sense, I think, for starting filmmakers because you can let the genre itself be the star of the show. You don't need big names or big stars. Horror is the reason horror fans go to see horror movies. As long as you have an interesting concept and you deliver on a couple of basic expectations that people have, which, sorry to say, yeah, a little bit of gore, a little bit of nudity, you throw those in, it's almost like insurance. Beyond that, you want to try and tell the best story you can and make the best movie you can. But you have a built-in crowd that is ready to see your movie, no matter what it's about, no matter who made it or who is in it, simply because it is a horror movie. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, for starting filmmakers to use the genre as their starting base. And that's kind of what I've been doing.
Yeah, that puts it all into absolute perfect perspective, really. It's just... Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's definitely the genre that's easiest to start into because it's easiest fiscally, it's the easiest production wise. You know, you don't have to go with any over the top spaceships or large palatial estates or anything like that. Plus, as you said, you kind of have a built-in audience as long as you include a few simple things. Which, let's face it, you're going to include things like either or gore or nudity, if not both.
Yeah,
and,
they both kind of easily fall into horror movies, honestly, because we're being preyed upon in horror movies, our fears. And when you're really at your core terrified and afraid, you're naked. You have no protection from what you're afraid of. Naked is how you portray that. viscerally. And gore is just another thing like that. I think they naturally fall into the genre. Some people are clever about trying to get around them, but guess what? You're going to lose that base of the horror audience if you don't deliver on a couple of those on a couple of those things, for better or for worse. But you're going to lose them. For all, I just think it's a good idea. It's called your insurance. Put some boobs and put some gore in your movie.
Yeah, like 10%.
We try to be equal opportunity too. We don't just do boobs; we do dicks too. So we put equal opportunity nudity in the movies and try to put a little bit of gore in there too, and that's your insurance.
Or you can kill two birds with one stone and have a couple of dicks chopped off. There you go.
Oh yeah, like the taint. So many dicks explode and die in that movie. It's pretty amazing.
And I'm going to Google that now.
Troma released it most recently.
While he's looking that up, so to go back to childhood, if you were with the Jehovah's for a time being, then I'm guessing you didn't participate in Halloween.
No.
But you did say that your mother eventually did leave that. How old were you guys when you left that?
It was really just for a couple of years, I think, 4th and 5th grade, maybe. By 6th grade, I think we were out.
Okay. So what about before and after that? Did you celebrate or participate in Halloween before or after that?
Yeah, before and after, it was just like most, Judeo-Christian families and all the holidays and everything. So,
did you particularly enjoy Halloween or no?
I mean, it's not this thing that I am as nostalgic about as a lot of horror fans are. It was fun to dress up, but I usually dressed up like Star Wars characters. I wasn't really I wasn't a mummy. I think one year my mom made me dress up as Fu Manchu. I hated that.
Well, that takes care of one of the questions too, which was favorite costume, release costume. I'd say it sounds like it's safe to say that was Fu Manchu.
Fu Manchu was the least. I don't even know what I could say was my favorite. It was always generic. We bought the store-bought stuff, the little vinyl suits that you wore over your regular clothes, and then there was that mask with the eye cutouts and a tiny little hole to breathe out of. Those things. That's what we did. We weren't terribly creative.
And not every question is going to relate to every guest. We just have them because you never know which ones are going to relate to who. So
sure.
Yeah. Ooh, terror. Do you have any events as a child that like true life events that scared the shit out of you, or anything terrifying?
I don't know if they. It's hard to know what impact they had, but looking back, it seems like they should have had impact. One of my cousins died when he was in the 1st grade in a drunk driving accident. So I think that, and one of my other cousins having cancer and having to have one of her legs removed.
Yes.
I think might have contributed to a preoccupation with mortality from a young age that maybe a lot of other kids don't think about. My brother and I would actually sit in our pre-internet, pre-anything kind of technological days and just sit at our desk and draw pictures and things, and we'd have little schedules for ourselves. And I remember looking at my brother's schedule one day, and every day he would schedule for himself at the end of his day to worry about dying.
That was written in his schedule.
This is a kid in grade school who would just put on his schedule every day, earlier in the day, there'd be read this book, watch this TV show, play outside, whatever. But at the end, before he would be free from his daily schedule, he would devote 10 or 15 minutes to worrying about dying, which sounds hilarious on one level, but it also kind of reminds me of the fact that we've thought about mortality a lot back then, and still do, really. I tried not to think about it so much. Yeah. It sucks. This mortal coil, it fucking sucks.
Goddamn free radicals. Stupid.
Well, got to take the pros with the cons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terror, though. I was terrified of roller coasters. They made me get on the Beast one day at Kings Island. I started screaming before it started. I was still screaming after it stopped. Strangers were trying to comfort me. So that was worst.
I can relate. Yep. Roller coasters are still not fun for me. And yeah, it's just you get pressured into going on them. And then afterwards, you're just I still hate this. No.
Yeah. I got used to them and I conquered that fear as a teenager or a young adult. But by that point, they just started physically hurting. At least the Beast did, because it's a wooden roller coaster. It's really jerky. It just hurt to ride that thing.
Oh yeah.
as an adult.
Yeah. We had one at
can't
Busch
remember.
Gardens here called Gwazi, and I think it was shut down for exactly that reason. Like, people would just complain about getting off the ride with bruises.
Yeah.
There was that one, and I'm trying to remember. There was another one I used to ride when I was a kid. It might have been, I want to say Chicago, but it was a really big white one. Huh. It's gonna bug me.
I think I can dig a little deeper since you guys have this psychological show.
What you got?
But I'm gay, so I grew up as a gay kid, and I didn't have an identity for it. I didn't know that I was gay until much later in life, but I always had this suspicion that if my parents really knew me, they wouldn't like me. And that kind of is a terrifying thing to grow up with as a kid. And part of that, the Jehovah's Witness thing, before it ended, oh my gosh, I told my mother I hated Jehovah. And I got my ass beat so bad that really kind of drove a wedge between me and my mom. In my heart, it drove a wedge between me and my mom for the rest of my life. And it's, now we're good, but that event, I was like, God, religion did this to my mother. I don't need religion in my life. And that's a decision that I've never looked back on because I've seen it do it has warped so many people to do such awful things thinking they were doing the right thing. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most insidious qualities about religion is that people wield it as a weapon unknowingly a lot of times because they think they're doing the right thing. It's really insidious.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation that it's just mutated into. Because I mean, I get it. Certain religions are necessary, if not in the most base definition of it, just to keep man from his nature of being an asshole. But most religions just have ideas that are supposed to be things that you build your life around, not things that you wage literal wars and kill thousands for. So basically, it's a good idea on paper that humanity really fucked up and went the wrong direction with a long time ago.
Well, I mean, it's like anything else in the world. I mean, so for me, spirituality is about the feeling connected with something other than yourself, whether that's another human being or animals or nature or universe or whatever. But, anything that can be used for good can also be improperly used. And obviously that's something that a lot of people have improperly used. So,
and when you talk about it that way, like spirituality, when I think back, I'm like, God, I mean, depending on how you define the word pray, I pray all the time. Yeah. All the time. Like even as a kid, I would just always vet every decision in my head with that other voice inside my head. And why not just call it God if you want? If you do that, then I pray all the time, all day long about everything. Because everything I do, I always am like double checking, triple checking, vetting and re-vetting to make sure that it's the best solution to the problem at hand. And so I think in my own way, I'm deeply spiritual and possibly religious. I pray all the time about things. And I feel like I've had a really blessed life. I haven't had a whole lot of catastrophes or horrible things happen to me randomly, knock on wood. I don't want to bring it all out now, but I don't know. I can't say that I'm not a spiritual or religious person because I think those words are really hard to define and we all define them differently.
Yeah. For me, the way I've always defined it is religion is an attempt to organize spirituality. So for me, that just never made sense because one person can have a moment where they feel at one with the universe, but having, get 300 people together in a room and go, okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, feel.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't work for me.
The fact that at that point it comes all funneled through one man or woman up on the pulpit, then how do you know it's God if it's being filtered through this one person? That kind of scares me too. So I don't know.
That's a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah, it is.
So what about teenagers? You had mentioned Texas Chainsaw and Evil Dead, but I think you also said that was college.
That was college, yeah. Teenage years were horrible. God, I was bullied. I was one of the nerdy kids. I was in the smart class. I don't know if classes are still segregated this way anymore. It seems like AP. They probably aren't.
Yeah, like AP or IB, the International Baccalaureate.
I was in the smartest English classes and the well, for lack of a better term, dumbest math classes and sometimes science classes because I sucked at those things. I was really good with English and reading and literature and spelling and all that, but when it came to math and science, I just blew chunks. I had to have a tutor for a while in science and math, and but what that did for me is that it isolated me from some people, but it also made me closer to people that I wouldn't have been because I was friends with people on both sides of the tracks. Because I had kids from the smart classes and kids from the dumb classes that I was friends with, really good friends with, and still are friends with today. And I know those are crude terms, but that really is kind of how the cookie crumbled back then. It got better over the course of high school, though. I think by senior year, there wasn't so much bullying going. And I'm grateful for that. I think a lot of that went away. And I went to college assuming it'd be the same, and it wasn't at all. So it might just be that Southern Indiana, where I grew up, was a horrible place in terms of all that.
That is
because,
possible.
Yeah, very, very possibly. But like in college, I came out and it was fine. It wasn't a big deal to anyone. It's exactly the best. It's the best reaction that I could have hoped for. Is like people just they didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, that was what, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s?
92, 94 actually is when I came out. I was in college for 2 years at that point, and I was in an all-male dorm, and no one cared. Like, life did not change at all, one bit, and it was fine. It's only with some family and, it was really just family members that were, like, stunned and shocked and in disbelief, and it wasn't a big deal.
I think it's funny that way. Like in the early to mid 90s, it was like a lot of things were just a lot more easily socially accepted, like people's sexuality, race, a lot of things like that. And it was just like, okay, it was understood and very nonchalantly too. Whereas like nowadays, things have gone further and further into like almost a forced PC realm where everything is accepted and accepted, for lack of a better second term.
Yeah. It's a controversial thing to say, but when I did come out, I participated in this panel at college where 4 or 5 gay people would talk to a class of people, just students, about being gay, because it was like this opportunity to ask people questions about things you didn't know about. And I just tried to answer the questions as normally as I could and make it not seem like a big deal. But I got the sense that there were 1 or 2 other people on the panel that were trying to make themselves sound very freakish, like talking about being a dominant or a submissive and talking about anal sex and things like that too much. And I'm like, I mean, that's not who you are. It's not what you are. And I just felt like they were giving the wrong impression to focus on those things as much as they did. And I do think
that might have been who they are.
It's possible, but I doubt it. I think they just wanted attention. And it's not PC to say that kids want attention when they come out as something. But at the same time, I know kids. I was one, at least at one point, and I know that attention and celebrity and popularity are very important to people. So I can't say with all confidence that there are not some people, whether they're a teenager or even an adult, who don't do things like come out or say they're gay or something unusual just for attention. Those people actually do exist. I hope they're in the minority. And that's one of the reasons why my favorite way to react to that sort of thing is just, so what? I don't care.
Yeah, like, oh, okay, cool.
I don't care if so-and-so is gay or transgender or what. Like, they don't need a parade. They don't need criticism. They don't need to be beat up. They don't need anything. You should treat them exactly as you would anyone else.
Like a human being?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I think what I was trying to get at is to say that, as you say, there are people who will come off as extreme in order to meet whatever need it is that is inside of them, whether they feel like they need to be unique or because they want attention or, whatever it is that's driving them to do the things that they're doing. Where I was going with that is to say that, maybe that is who they are in terms of the part of them wanting to be unique or wanting attention. Like you were saying that the topic that they were harping on, maybe they didn't need to go into that much detail, but to me it's I don't know how to word it.
It's a hard thing to word, and political correctness is something I'm scared of too nowadays.
I'm not even really concerned about the political correctness part of it. Chris knows this. I know you don't know this, but I was a bartender at a lesbian bar for 3 years. I'm very comfortable talking about a lot of things. I have met a lot of people who, as you say, can be very extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the comment that you had made was sort of like, yeah, they didn't need to go there. And I think my response was, well, that's just maybe who they are.
I think it was more on like the extent of which the topic they were talking about too. It's like, you can voice your expression and your lifestyle and everything, but nobody needs to know how many dildos and rubber gimp suits you have at home.
Yeah. Well, there's this notion, at least there was in the 90s. I had a friend who was very militant. He called himself a militant queer even, and I was never comfortable with the word queer. I just, that's such a strange word. I don't want to isolate myself from people. I don't want to be queer. I just want to be like everyone else.
Right.
But he was, and we'd have conversations, and he would point out the fact that somebody's got to, start the revolution. Someone's got to, I don't know, do like Rosa Parks and sit in the front of the bus and be the defiant one that gets all the attention and starts the shitstorm. And I just wasn't that person. I didn't want to do that unless it was
like
personal.
Why's it got to be a revolution?
Yeah. I mean, there's a time for revolution and there's a time to not have a revolution. So sometimes the militant people, I understand where they're coming from, and some of them have really personal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when you get to know someone, you find out why they are the way they are for sure. It's legitimate. It's for real. But I tend to feel sorry for those people a little because they carry around that burden and they meet a lot of people that really don't need to be met with a revolution type attitude. They're already cool. In fact, I mean, to extrapolate that a little further, I feel like all the friends that I've ever had, male friends, and ironically, in high school, all my friends were female, and now they're almost all male. And all the fans of all my movies, the demographics skew like 90% male, which is amazing. But all the men that I know who never gave a shit about gayness or homosexuality, they're all cool. They've all always been cool. And anyone who ever did kind of feel strange about it turned out to be gay later. And that seems to be the case in politics as well. Anyone that's like ever shouting down gay people, they turn out to be gay themselves. We hate that part of ourselves and we deflect it upon the public. So if I meet a man and I don't know if he's gay or straight or whatever, but he doesn't give a shit about whether I am or not, then I know he is who he says he is. But if he's like, I don't know about gayness, they can do their thing, but just if they have any hesitation or reluctance about it, then I'm like, probably gay.
What are you afraid
of? And it almost always turns out to be true.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go in a different direction there for a second. You were saying about, things changing. I'm, as you can probably tell by my voice, middle-aged white guy. But I grew up in the city. And I got into hip hop right at the start. In '85, I was listening to hip hop, and that was really the thing that I listened to the most all through high school and into college. And living in inner cities, I talked with a lot more of a street slang than I do now. But if I get a little too much alcohol in me, it starts coming out.
Well, I mean, that happens too. You adopt the vernacular of wherever you're currently living. When people move to the South, sometimes you get a little bit of a twang after living there for so long.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is now that I'm in my 40s, there's sometimes that I see people who are, in their teens and early 20s doing things that I would have done when I was in my teens or 20s. And I have noticed that I will stop myself from saying something to them maybe because I realize that if I were in their shoes, I'd probably be the first person that they would hate. Like, who's this fat white dude, old white dude talking to me, But they wouldn't know that I'm not the enemy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. There's a lot of segregation amongst us, and I think that's the downside of PC. I think PC started with good intentions. I think the whole movement started to make everyone feel comfortable and included. And when you take that notion to its most militant end, it really ends up encouraging and enforcing segregation.
Yeah, it's almost like it went past the goal of middle ground of evening things out to be just normal and went too far the other direction.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that went too far in the other direction.
Yeah, off on tangents.
I love tangents.
So what were some of your big influences in your teenage years of, horror in the media? Were there any movies that stood out to you, or books or literature? You mentioned you're in AP literature.
I mean, I read as a kid a lot more than I do now, actually, but I don't think anything really, other than Dune. And honestly, I only read Dune because the movie was coming out. And back in those days, the movies took so long to come to our theater that I would get impatient and end up reading the novelizations or the source material so that I could at least know something.
Right. I did the same thing with Ender's Game. It was the book was better than the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I loved Dune the book, and I actually also loved the movie. But growing up through school, I was a big fan of Gremlins, then Dune, then Back to the Future. I fell into Silverhawks and Thundercats pretty big as a kid. Willow I loved. Oh, yeah. Howard the Duck I loved. The Abyss, Batman. Those were the big ones when I was in high school and growing up. It was never horror until college. But the big I don't have a whole lot of really favorite horror movies. I like a lot of them, but they don't end up in my upper echelon too often. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is divine. It's like the 10 Commandments for me. But after that one, Evil Dead 1 and 2 are kind of up there just because I'm so amazed at what he was able to achieve and how artistic and crafty those damn things are. The Pumpkinhead, I have a huge soft spot for because that's my favorite monster movie. I think that monster is just amazing, and it's
the animatronics there are just
everything.
Yeah,
the way they put a man in a suit that way, just that's one of the coolest monsters ever. And the atmosphere in that thing. I wish Stan Winston could have directed more movies. What are some other horror favorites, Tweety B? I can't remember. Most recently, The Witch blew me away. It's in my top 100. For sure. Yeah.
So for you then, really your introduction to horror wasn't even in the teens. Like you said, it was when you got into college.
Yeah, I was about 20.
Yeah, sounds like it was more into adulthood then.
Did you participate in Halloween as a teen at all? Any
Not really, no.
Events?
No. Didn't.
Okay.
No.
I don't know if I said this earlier in the interview, but we have a lot of questions that are there just because it might click with somebody, and if it doesn't click with you, that's fine too.
I never, horror I think is an anthem for a lot of people. The way that a lot of teenagers listen to loud music that their parents don't like is sort of a way of defying and rebelling against your parents, this generational rebellion thing. I think that's true for horror movies a lot of time. The horror movies are alluring to people because your parents don't want you watching it. Your parents don't want you to be like that. I think a lot of people fall into that component. I didn't ever feel a need to rebel against my parents that way. Maybe is one of the reasons why horror never made that much sense to me as a kid. But I also didn't have good taste as a kid either. So it could have just been that. Because later, I got to watch Friday the 13th and the Halloween movies and the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Mostly, a couple slipped in while I was younger, but mostly I saw all of those as an adult, like in my 30s. And I like them. I actually really like the Friday the 13th movies for what they are. They're not high artistry, but they're fun. They're a lot of fun. And the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I think, are really inventive and creative. I really like those. The Halloween franchise, I'm not as big of a fan of because it's so up and down.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place.
It doesn't hold together as a franchise very well.
It's like Halloween movies kind of have the same thing as Star Trek movies. Like the even ones are good, or vice versa. I can't remember which.
The even ones, yeah. But I like those things, and so I don't have a nostalgia for them the way a lot of people do because I didn't really grow up with them. But I do really like some of those things.
That makes sense.
But the last 10 or 20 years, I think, have been boring. Like, I haven't responded to a whole lot. I liked The Descent and The Witch. And then I've seen some, like Eden Lake came out of nowhere, and I really liked it. And Blood Creek that Joel Schumacher directed, I really liked it.
Eden Lake was the one with, oh God, what's her name?
It has Michael Fassbender in it.
Yeah, that got really graphic and dark near the end. I'm just like,
it did.
Fun suspense romp with a couple near a lake, and then holy shit, violence.
Yeah, and he's in Blood Creek too, as this Nazi resurrected from the dead.
Yes, okay, I didn't recognize that name at first. I have seen Blood Creek. Blood Creek was pretty good. I liked it. It was, it had some moments where you could tell like it was kind of pandering to its audience, but still, the special effects and cinematography in it were really good.
As he said earlier, insurance.
Yeah. But by and large, I'm not interested in The Conjuring or the Saw movies or almost anything that comes out in the theater. Like all the horror fans today is like, we have to go to whatever comes out. And I'm like, I don't want to see the next Annabelle movie or anything called Sinister or I don't know. Just none of them appeal to me. The trailers are usually what I see. And I'm like, nope, don't want to see that. Nope, don't want to see that.
The first Sinister was okay.
So what was it you loved about the Texas Chainsaw?
It felt real. The fact that it was 16 millimeter maybe helped. Mm-hmm. The performances felt natural.
Yeah, because they kind of in a way were.
Yeah, they didn't feel like they were actors. Like it felt like a real event unfolding before your eyes. And the tone of it is so unique because I think you can watch it, as I did the first time anyway, as a straight horror movie. But then when you're older and maybe more jaded, you can watch it as a dark-ass comedy. Mm-hmm. And it works either way. And I think it's really hard to strike a tone like that will work regardless of which direction you're coming at it from. So, and it's a movie I watch, and every time I watch it, I don't love it any less at all. Yeah. If anything, I love it more. Yeah. It is a thrill ride. Like, I'm literally holding my breath the last half hour of that whole movie. Once they've caught her, and she's at the dinner table and trying to get away from them, it's just like edge of your seat. Oh my God, where is this movie going? How is she going to get away from them? That no other movie has ever, like, ratcheted the tension like that for me.
Yeah, I think the simple answer to Texas Chainsaw is it's just a really well-made movie. I mean, it's a concept and a theme that has been adopted by so many other movies now. It's kind of one of the first ones that started it, but even going back and watching it, it's just very well made with the editing and the lighting and
the
like
extreme
you said,
close-ups.
The extreme close-ups. That's a lot of eyeball and a lot of screaming.
Yeah,
and it's uncomfortable. It's
Who's
just well done.
Queen? Marilyn Burns. Who the hell has ever screamed as much as she does in that movie?
No one.
I don't know how she survived that performance, honestly.
So what did you love about Evil Dead 1 and 2?
The fact that it was friends going out and making a movie in the woods on weekends, and that they're as good as they are and as inventive as they're like live action cartoons. The way that Sam Raimi executes the scenes, lays them out.
Yeah.
The camera angles, the hyper acting, the weird bursts of comedy interjected with horror. It's just manic as fuck.
You're right. It's kind of the same thing there. It's just it's the skillful way in which it was portrayed, but it's just got a different theme to it. It's very cartoony, but very well done as far as that cartoon archetype goes. Like, nailed it.
Anyone could have done it. That's the part that really seals the deal for me, is that Texas Chainsaw and Evil Dead are movies anyone could have done because they just scraped together dollars and got their friends, put out posts on college campus and dragged everyone out, gave them very little money. Anyone could have done those things if they had only had the stories, the concepts, the scripts. That makes them even more appealing to me, especially at the time I saw them, because I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and those were the kinds of films that I could have made.
I'm listening to the things that you're saying about these movies, but when I'm listening to the things that you're talking about liking in these last 2-3 movies, to me it sounds like all the things that you mentioned are critiquing them from a filmmaker's point of view, from an artist point of view, not as a fan, if that makes any sense. Like the only thing I think I've heard you say was that Chainsaw felt real and the performances felt natural.
Mm-hmm.
So do you mainly see these movies from a filmmaker's point of view, or like was there something that you liked about them from a horror point of view, or is it mainly the artist point of view?
I don't know if I separate out points of view when it comes to genre. The filmmaker aspect I can definitely separate out, and I don't watch any movie like that the first time, because if the story's not interesting enough to make me forget about that, then it's probably not a good movie anyway.
Fair.
But in terms of watching something as horror or not, I don't like to distinguish. I'll watch Steel Magnolias with the same frame of mind I'll watch The Nightmare on Elm Street. I just want to watch a good movie and a good story. Now, sometimes if it's Saturday night, I'm more in the mood for something that's maybe a little creepier, but I don't think I tend to judge things differently. I want them to have their own integrity. Usually a movie sets up its own sort of universe of logic and parameters within the first 5 or 10 minutes. So you can be as realistic or as fantastic as you want, as long as you set up those parameters well enough in the first 5 or 10 minutes that you don't suspend my disbelief beyond that 10 minutes.
Right.
So I don't, as long as the movie kind of tells me what it is at the beginning, I go with it. I watch it under its own rules. I think. At least that's how I try to approach it.
No, I get that, because that's usually my hugest critique of any kind of movie. And again, across genres, I feel the same way. I give a movie, maybe 2 or 3 of those, but once you're past the third, I'm not a fan,
Yeah. I mean, a horror is one, it's like a diet. You want to have a good diet, and horror is just one flavor, one food group.
Yeah, you can't eat nothing but cake.
You need some comedy. I think it's sad how drama has fallen by the wayside and moved to television, but at least it's still out there in some shape or capacity.
I mean, in a way, there have been some combinations of horror and drama with Ari Aster's films. They're a bit dramatic,
for sure. Yeah, I have this kind of debate with people all the time about what is horror or what isn't, and there are always people that don't want to call good horror movies because, like I grew up thinking slasher movies were horror movies, a lot of people have grown up thinking the same, that torture movies or supernatural horror movies are horror and nothing else can be. They can't accept the fact that Silence of the Lambs is a horror movie, or that Ari Aster's movies are horror movies. My friend Sean, when we go to the movies, if it's a horror movie and she likes it, she comes out saying it's not a horror movie. I don't know. I can't
be a
think
horror
of a
movie because I like it.
I know. It's like if it's good, all of a sudden it can't be a horror movie. No, it's just that there is a lot of shit in horror because it's a cheap genre. Hollywood knows that it's the cheapest kind of movie to make, and it usually has the biggest profit margin because of that ever reliable audience.
Yep.
So they think they can just throw anything together and it'll make money, because it usually does. But that doesn't usually yield the best results. I think rom-coms are the same way. They're so formulaic, they're cheap to make. You put a couple of halfway likable stars in it, they're all the same damn story, but people will go see it in droves. So I think it's fair to be hard on horror movies and romantic comedies both, because they do fall rather conventional a lot of the time. But man, when somebody as daring as Ari Aster or the guy that did The Witch in the Lighthouse comes out and puts their own spin on it, that's cause for celebration. And I think we're seeing more and more of this experimentation in the horror genre, and that's a good thing. I like a lot of what I see, but I haven't loved a lot of it yet. But you know what? You can't love everything. It's not a big deal.
and it's getting there. It's progress.
Yeah. But The Witch, man, I was so elated. I haven't had an experience like Brian and I went and saw The Witch together, and we were at the end like, whoa, whoa.
One of those moments where you just kind of slowly turn towards each other in the chairs with the same dumbfounded look on your face, like, that was good.
Yeah, that happens so rarely. I had that feeling at District 9 and Little Miss Sunshine and Return of the King. And I think that's it for this entire century so far. But that's just me.
I enjoyed Hereditary. I got a lot of cross looks when I dragged my friends to the theater to go see it because they were like, "Dude, there's a bunch of weird cultist naked people. What the fuck was that?" Oh, it was good.
Oh, you mean Midsommar?
Both actually. I think Hereditary ended with the cultists, but Midsommar also had that too.
They were so similar. The two movies were thematically so similar that I think I was a little harder on Midsommar.
Yeah.
Because but then in hindsight, if I had never seen Hereditary, I think I might have really loved Midsommar even more.
Yeah, because they did kind of both have the same theme or feel to them, but the same director.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you hadn't seen one before the other one, you had a similar experience with them.
And you could say, I think people could say the same shit about me. I do the same damn thematic material all the damn time. I need to fucking throw it away and get a new book.
No, there were no clowns in Found.
So, of the movies that you mentioned having been experienced or exposed to in your adult years, did any of them actually scare you? Or was it all just observational?
That's a question I have a very hard time with. Because I don't, what actually scares anybody?
As an adult, anyway?
Well, yeah. But I know people who don't watch horror movies at all because they're scary. If they watch one, they will be scared, or at least they'll say they are, and I'll take their word for it. But for anyone who actually likes horror movies, do they actually really scare you? I've been disturbed by them, Tweety. Cut that out. I've been disturbed, but I don't know that I've ever been scared.
Yeah, that's kind of a concept that I keep coming to with these interviews. Is like, you go down that rabbit hole of horror fanatic, and you watch this movie and this movie and this movie, and you get into the extreme horrors, the extreme indie horrors, and it starts off with looking for that initial scare that you got when you watched a creepy movie as a kid, but you never really get that because they're not scary. They're just more and more disturbing. So the most you get is really uncomfortable.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe it's easier to do that. Scary. Spiders scare me, so I'm sure I'd be scared if someone fell into a pit of spiders, maybe? I don't know.
Well, let's turn the question around a different way then. Instead of focusing on the things that scare you about horror movies, what are the things that excite you or what do you enjoy about horror movies?
Okay, that's a good question.
There you go.
Horror is heightened everything. If you compare it to drama or comedy, horror takes dramatic license. It heightens the scenario so that it's something out of the realm of possibilities in our everyday world. And I think that introduces us to the possibility of metaphor and symbols and allegory. And science fiction, fantasy, and horror, all three have the capacity to weave a fanciful tale that can be entertaining all on its own right on a surface level as an adventure or just a story, but can also work on another level as metaphor, symbology, or allegory. And I think those are the stories that endure for someone like me, because the more you watch it, the more you might get out of it. Like, you might just watch it at a surface level once, but then the second or third time you watch it, you might be able to draw parallels and make it into like a political allegory for today. Horror, in particular, has a storied history of being a product of its time. So someone today can go back and watch movies from the 50s and know about the atomic fear that everyone had at that time, the fear of space exploration. And you can see the naivete in movies before Ed Gein happened in our world. And then you can see the boom in horror of The Human Killer when that happened. The slasher genre came out because we discovered that in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And some people I'm not as well fluent about the contemporary horror movies, but I've read arguments about why zombies have become interested and more interesting to us in this century in the late 90s.
Yeah, that and any kind of apocalyptic theme, there's even kind of non-horror thriller movies where, there's a cataclysmic world-ending event of some kind. That's really popular nowadays.
I also want to mention that horror in any decade is always interesting to watch in terms of the gender paradigm. Mm-hmm. Because men and women, they're also treated as products of their time from when they're made. And nowadays, there are a lot of interesting things being done where the tables are turned. What used to always happen to women is now happening to men, and sex and fear go hand in hand. Sex is scary. I mean, letting someone else inside your body, literally penetrating somebody's body, the creature growing inside you. I think sex is fucking horrifying. I really do. So all my stuff usually involves sex and horror because I think they're equal. Yeah. They're equally interesting and terrifying.
Well, I mean, one has to do with trust and the other has to do with violation of trust. So
right.
By nature, it's intrusive.
Right.
But no, it's interesting to hear you say that. Like the whole thing about like the whole you can judge time periods by what horror is popular there, because horror movies and the whole horror genre is always based off of fear, but it's based more off of the common threaded fear or the more popular fear of the time. So yeah, you look back on 50s and it's nuclear scares, and the 80s it was, well, nuclear, but more of like a mutants created from nuclear waste, because we thought that nuclear waste at the time, gave you extra arms and flying powers and things.
Right. I think it's also interesting that horror started to parody itself. It's done it a few times over the course of cinema history, but it did it at the end of the 80s and into the 90s. Horror comedy kind of became a bigger thing than straight horror. And I wonder if that might not be a reflection of the fact that our society started to feel complacent and take things for granted. Nothing had come out that really scared us, maybe.
Yeah.
And gave us free reign to let horror become funny until something horrible like 9/11 happened again.
Yeah. Or
maybe like now we still have horror comedies, but we have a lot more straight horror nowadays, I think, than we did in the late 80s, early 90s.
I think I think the reason that horror comedy is more successful is pretty simple. It's because both horror fans will go see that as well as people who wouldn't normally go see horror. So just based on that alone, you would think the audience size would be larger. So
yeah, quite possibly.
So do you have, as Chris likes to say, a horror crew now that you're as an adult? Is there a social element? Do you share this with other people?
Personally or professionally?
Both, I guess.
I definitely have a professional crew because I've met a lot of other independent filmmakers, and we almost all do horror. And they know actors. So professionally, I'm sort of in a big network of people. But personally, no. It was weird, actually. Once I started, after Found came out, my first movie I ever promoted at all, then I started getting Facebook friends. And it's got to the point where all my Facebook connections are horror fans for the most part, like just overwhelmed with horror fans. And they all assume that I'm like them. They think I like heavy metal and Faces of Death and just horror 24/7, and I'm so not that way.
Dude, bro, have you seen this movie Begotten? It's so metal.
Oh, I know. And indie movies too. I haven't seen a lot of indie movies and underground movies, and people are always like, oh my god, you haven't seen that? It's like, yeah, they think I'm like in the club, but I'm really not. It's kind of strange. So I wouldn't say I have a personal crew. I have a few friends that are into horror, pretty hardcore, but I don't know. I'm a hard judge of myself. Somebody else needs to come say that. Because now that you're asking me, I'm like, well, shit. Dave likes horror. Mason likes horror. Arthur and Leah and Shane like horror. And Brian. I think everyone does like horror, but we don't define our lives by it. Well, Arthur might. Arthur probably really does, but it takes all kinds.
Fair enough.
I don't know. I would love to do non-horror, and Brian's also talked a lot about not doing horror movies, and he's trying to because Jesse's not a horror movie.
No.
And neither was Space Babes, really. And I say good luck, man. I really hope you can do something people want to see, because it's just hard to reach a market if you don't have a horror movie. But we're all still interested in horror. All the people that I work with any regularity, if a good horror script came along, we'd all be down to do it. And it'd have to be one hell of a compelling drama or comedy for us to want to do it. And I have a suspicion that we'd end up putting horror in it.
So, not speaking on horror now, any genre, and not asking about your favorite, just numerically speaking, what movie have you watched more than any other?
Call it Desert Island movie.
I can't say the one, but I can probably say 5. The small handful of films that I rewatch and rewatch and rewatch all the time: Gremlins,
Okay.
Pumpkinhead,
Mm-hmm.
Poltergeist, Willow,
Mm-hmm.
and The Secret of Nim.
Ah, yes. Points. Props for that one. That's
And Jaws. I watch Jaws a lot.
the first one, right?
Oh yeah, those are ones that I never get tired of. I can watch them anytime. Back to the Future, if it's on, I can watch that all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Last Crusade is not my favorite Indiana Jones, but for whatever reason, it's the most rewatchable one, I think. But
it's funny. We've been going through this interview, and the vibe that I've been getting from you is that you're really not a horror fan. But when you list the six films that you watch more than any other, 4.5 of them are horror films. I mean,
Will is not really a horror movie. It's more of a fantasy
I wasn't
adventure.
counting that one.
Oh.
Gremlins, Pumpkinhead, Poltergeist, Jaws, and Nim.
Yeah.
Nim is not horror. Nim's animated.
I said 4.5.
Yeah. I have that one aside. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't consider myself. I mean, I'm a horror fan in as much as I'm a fan of movies. But
that's why we ask, like, of not counting genre, but numerically speaking, what have you watched more than any other? And you're still putting 4 or 5 of the top 6 in horror. So I just think that's really interesting.
Happy coincidence. It's irony.
I mean, horror is a big part of me. I would be, if you took the horror out of my movies that I love, it'd be a big gaping hole. It would hurt. Like, I don't know if my love for movies would survive if you took the horror part out of it.
But that's really interesting to me, because if, like, thinking back on the most of the this interview, it's like, I don't know. You seem
it's just not a cultural thing with me. I don't love carving pumpkins on Halloween or going out and dressing up for Halloween. Or I know people like that who wear black all the time and are horror every day of the year, and they're some of my good friends, but it's just not how I am. A lot of people talk about me like I'm that way. God, at work, they know what kind of movies I make, and they always introduce me to people as a horror filmmaker, and I'm like, oh, well, you can do that. That's fine. But it's like, it gives people the wrong impression. They're like, oh, if Scott's going to tell us a story, it's going to be something deep and disturbing and dark and terrifying. And I'm like, not always. I've got some pretty light, fluffy things I'd like to tell. I just don't have the opportunity right now.
Yeah, and I wasn't approaching this interview as pigeonholing you like that. Even taking the consideration that, okay, he's got other stories that he likes to tell that aren't in horror. Just digging into trying to figure out what it is that you like about horror, I feel very stymied in this particular case, because, like, everything that we've asked you in terms of what it is that you liked about them, I don't know,
Well, horror and science fiction both question the human condition. They both bring with them literary depth. If you want to probe it, if you want to mine it, it's there. Horror reminds us of how fragile we are as living beings. It pits us against one another, man and woman. Just thematically, is ripe. It's a ripe genre for interpretation, just like science fiction is, I think. And so I'm drawn to them that way. But like all the dress up, the blackness, the ghosts, the spider webs, the dress up is not something that I'm not nostalgic about.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I am, I don't know, God, I hate the word, intellectually interested in horror. Mm-hmm. And I do enjoy some good atmosphere. I mean, don't get me wrong, I fucking love some good atmosphere. But I mean, I don't know. I like horror just as part of my diet. I'm not a horror fan the way some people are. I'm sorry.
No, I think I get it. It sounds to me like you're more of a fan of the core values and less the fanfare, if you will.
Yeah. I love all movies. Like I really do. I've got a couple thousand DVDs and Blu-rays sitting around me because I'm trying to sell them. If you're interested, go to scottschirmer.com. I'm selling my entire collection. But horror is the kind of film I make, and for some of the reasons I've talked about already on this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
is that it's a good showcase for artistic ability and storytelling, and it has a reliable audience.
Do you see any common threads? Like, if you look at the horror movies that you like, do you see any common threads about the kinds of horror that you like in terms of cannibalism or occult, metaphysical, comedy? Is there any?
That's interesting.
You can't say just good movies because that's of course.
I love a good monster movie. Like, I'm always on the lookout for a good monster movie because I just love the artistry of how they bring that monster alive.
Yeah. Case in
So,
point,
like, I love
or Pumpkinhead.
Pumpkinhead for sure, but I'm trying to think of, there aren't ever enough to satisfy me. I mean, I love a good werewolf movie. American Werewolf in London is great. Cloverfield, I had a fun time with Cloverfield. It gets a lot of shit, but you know what? It's a monster movie. And you know what? I get a lot of shit for liking Jurassic World, but for me, it's another goddamn monster movie. I need a good monster movie every now and then, and dinosaurs are good monsters.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it on that level. So I see that thread. I also like realistic, dramatic horror movies, I guess you'd say. Something like The Witch, where the paranoia among the characters is really the horror. But I've never really thought about it, so I wasn't really prepared for an answer.
That's kind of the point of a good question.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, and this is almost tangential, but what is it that you like about monsters?
I couldn't tell you. Just on a core level, like when I get off this podcast tonight, if I was going to sit at my TV and go, okay, what do we want to watch now? If you were to tell me there's this really good monster movie you haven't seen, that's the one I would probably want to watch tonight. But I've seen Relic, and I've seen Pumpkinhead, and I've seen Gremlins, and I've seen Jurassic World, and I don't know what other monster movies I could see. I've seen all the Ray Harryhausen movies. It's hard to find them.
It's kind of funny because our last interview was with somebody who, for them, one of the core things for them was rebellion. And in this call, you're kind of just the opposite, that you're more about the identification, about wanting to identify with the other. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, fit in. Fit in's not that bad of a word. Yeah, I mean, everyone's got their rebellion, but my rebellion wasn't against my parents so much as the whole world's way of looking at gender and that stuff.
And you mentioned, early in the call, you said that, you kind of felt like you didn't fit in, that there was something different. And so I could see how that could cause you to want to identify and want to fit in. And so I didn't ask the question. I maybe should have asked the question. Does that, looking at it from that perspective, does that identify anything for you in terms of how you approach horror? Because you did mention questioning the human condition.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because I think I have noticed that in all my stories. I'm trying to get people to think about things that I don't think they think about to make them less afraid of them. Like Plank Face is about a guy going into the woods, meeting feral women and being abused by them, but then figuring out, you know what, I kind of like this, because I'm kind of suggesting that there's a primal part of us that does want to do that. We're human, noble creatures, but we're still animals, and that's not something most people feel comfortable acknowledging, is that they are animals. So I think you're onto something with that one. Maybe you can edit it in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because that's the way homosexuality starts out. Like, you don't want to acknowledge that part of yourself because nobody likes it. It's a part of yourself that you have to keep secret and not even think about. But if you don't think about it, you're never going to make peace with it. And if you're never going to make peace with it, then you're always going to feel this schizophrenic break in yourself that will never heal. And I think a lot of people repress a lot of sexuality. Like, a lot of people can't even look at their own genitals in the mirror. Like, they're just people that are afraid of it. And I think the more that they can try to make peace with sex and gender and fluidity and just not let it all freak them out so much, they might feel a lot happier and not as afraid of that stuff.
I once looked at my butthole in the mirror for like a good solid 2 minutes.
Really?
Just to get used to it,
I don't want to look at mine. I really don't.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. I'm sitting here having a deep thought, about to say something, and you pop out. Yeah, I've stared at my hole for 2 minutes.
Hey man, it's world changing. You should check your butthole out sometimes. I can't take me anywhere.
Well, what I was thinking of was, you mentioned about the homosexuality, and then there are some people who can't even look at their own gender, their own sexual organs. That too, and it reminded me of something that you said earlier on the call of nudity equating to vulnerability, which being symbolic in the movies. That's why the people who have sex are the ones who get killed.
Yep.
But also addressing what you just said about plank face and this guy that then goes out and, I think you said, wanting to kill the feral woman that he finds. Addressing the thing that you're afraid to address.
It makes you a less fearful person. And some people don't like that. They don't want you to be. I think people are threatened by, let's call them Nelly Queens, for example. And I remember before I was out, I also felt weird about really flamboyant gay characters, people. If they lisp and had the limp wrists and all the other stereotypical qualities, I didn't feel comfortable about that. And lo and behold, it's because I wasn't comfortable about that part of myself. Because now I don't have any problem at all. There are some people that's just how their energy manifests, and it's they couldn't hide it if they tried. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't bother me, but I still see that bothers some people. And it's not a problem with the person that has that energy. It's a problem with the person who has a problem with it. Mm-hmm. And as sooner that you can dig deep into yourself and ask yourself, why do I have a problem with that? It might lead you on the path to figuring out why you have that problem, addressing it, and becoming a better person as a result. Probably a gay person, but a better person nonetheless.
I'm glad that that I asked an additional question and kept going, because I think now, earlier I was struggling for a summary. Maybe now we have one.
Maybe
confronting your demons.
Yeah, confronting your demons. That's good. That really is interesting, actually. Yeah, because I did a short film called The Day Joe Left, and it's literally a guy confronting his demon manifest outside of himself, kind of haunting him. He strikes his wife in a domestic abuse situation, and his demon's trying to get him to kill her, and he's like fighting to not do that because he knows it's the wrong thing to do. Literally, a demon. Yeah, that's definitely. I think you found something.
Yeah.
Nice. Good. I'm glad that I asked the question then.
Yeah.
Chris and I have had a sort of a friendly debate about, should we dig deeper or should we take the first question or first answer? And I can see his point of wanting it to be a fun call. My response to him was that, for some people this is fun.
I just didn't want you to keep badgering people, man. You're like, God damn, man, take the answer.
No, it was a good balance. It's a good balance.
And that's what I said to him was I said, and you mentioned therapy, so I'll bring that up. When you go through some of this stuff, you kind of get you get to learn a gauge where you can tell, what's comfortable, what's not comfortable, where can I go, when's enough.
Yeah. It's like waiting tables. You got to read the table before you start pitching.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you've got a good goal then, because keeping it conversational and fun is one side of the spectrum, and the other one is kind of digging deep and talking about things that's more than just small talk, something that like the listener will actually hopefully identify with and want to like listen to.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's another good reason that Chris and I are a good pair for this, because he can balance out that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I bring up mindless chatter. Yes. Again, thank you, Scott.
No problem.
Chris, that was your cue.
Thank you, Scott, once again for joining us. And thank you to anyone out there listening. Again, please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We've got a schedule posted there to show you who we're going to be interviewing next, and plus a list of who we'd like to interview. So if anybody out there knows any of these people or has any connections with them, please do let us know. We've also got social media links to our Facebook page and Patreon if you want to become a supporter. If you do become a Patreon supporter, we have the full unedited lists of every one of these podcasts with fuck-ups and everything. So there's that. Or in general, just come let us know how we're doing. Or makesushappy.com.